studio prints following this documentary?
Yes. After the documentary, there was a gallery opened on the first floor where Dorothy organized exhibitions of prints. And at that point, she wanted to show prints which did not have great commercial importance or success, but they were very high quality. The workshop itself was extremely busy, printing color prints for great many number of artists, and she employed 5 people, 3 printers and 2 people for drying the prints and flattening them and cleaning them. The gallery was very active. She showed artists like Norman Ackroyd, Julian Trevelyan, Mary Fadden, Frank Martin, and many others. At the time, the printmaking was having a great renaissance, and it was so much spoken about and so active, so many artists were producing prints. But this did not carry on for very long. William Turnbull was one of the artists, early artists at the studio prints, and Dorothea printed all his prints because they were extremely difficult to print. Although they are very simple and just line etching, they have to be printed absolutely perfectly so that the background is wiped clean to print white and the lines absolutely intact with no breakage. And that's what happens often with line etchings when they are so simple and wiped with chalk so that the background is absolutely white. The chalk goes into the grooves and stops the ink transferring onto the paper, and the lines break and the print had to be rejected because that's not a kind of print an artist will like to have. In 1973, after I finished my postgraduate studies at the Slade, I met Dorothea by accident. And then I was involved in the studio prints. First, I didn't want to have anything to do with editioning, but I was helping the printers to solve their printing problems. Later on, Dorothea had great difficulty to find the right printers for some difficult jobs. And that's when I was involved in starting to edition for artists. Gradually, more artists came to the studio print. Here we have 2 different artists. John Hubbard, he did this print with soft ground technique, and it is a transcription of one of Rubens's drawings. And then we have Ken Kiff, and this is a completely different technique. It is called spitbite, that is painting the plate with the acid. And it is a print which has used 3 different plates to obtain different colors overlapping each other. I worked with Ken Kiff for 8 years, from 1990 to 1998, and then Dorothea started working with him, and his later prints are done by Dorothea. in the 80s already the print market was getting less and less active, and the work at the studio prints was diminishing. And yet, Dorothea managed to carry on relentlessly and attracting new artists to come and do their prints. And by then I was involved in the studio prints, and I was working with some artists as advisor and as a technician, and also I printed editions for these artists. In 1980, the market changed, and we had to change the policies at the studio prints. Instead of just being an editioning workshop, we decided to attract artists, painters, who wanted to make their plates, but they needed advice and also they needed technical help. In 1980, after 1980, I started working with Leon Kossoff, and later on Frank Auerbach, and after 1990, Ken Kiff, Celia Paul, Stephen Conroy, and also especially Lucien Freud. We both, Dorothea and myself, we worked with these artists, and we had different artists we worked with. Dorothea worked especially with Celia Paul, and after 98 with Ken Kiff. I worked with most of these artists. I worked with Ken Kiff till 98, but especially I worked with Frank Auerbach and Lucien Freud. Stephen Conroy, through Marlborough Gallery, sent me this plate as a trial print. And he was so happy with the result that he stayed one of our faithful artists. He did many other prints. This is a dry point. He went to produce etchings. He did not do another dry point after this one. Frank Auerbach did sets of prints. From time to time, he decided to do prints, and he did a run. Sometimes it was only 2 or 3 images, and other times he did a set of 7 portraits, or in this case, he did 4 prints. In this case, he did 4 images, and these are his biggest etchings. In this case, what is different is that he added a grid as part of the image, to the image itself. In the 90s, these artists we started working with in the 80s carried on working with us, and there was a great activity at the studio with Lucien Freud, who produced at least 4 different images a year, and Frank Auerbach, who came and did some series of prints. Ken Kiff, who worked regularly 1 day a week making his plates at the studio, and then we editioned his images. There was Stephen Conroy, Celia Paul, and then we had from time to time artists we didn't work with regularly, like Polarego and Kitai. Although I started working with Celia when she came to the studio prints, Dorothea took over a few years later. And these are two of the late images Celia produced. The top one is a portrait of her mother with Celia herself in the image on the background. And at the bottom you have a hard ground etching with tone left on the plate. Dorothea worked with her for many years, and in 2009 she had to stop because of her illness. She couldn't carry on the physical effort needed. Lucien Freud came to the studio prints in 1986, and he stayed a very loyal customer. He worked exclusively with me, and he did many prints, and he did many portraits. This is one of his most memorable portraits that I worked on with him. It was very important for both of us that we did our own work, and we both found time, despite all the activities at the studio prints, to do our own work, and that was the most important for us. And Dorothea developed her images, so did I, and we used a technique which was not used by our artists, or mezzotint. First, I came across mezzotint because of one of my teachers mentioning it. And then when I met Dorothea, I showed her how to do mezzotint, and she produced her images using this technique, and it suited her so well and her imagery. She produced almost all her images then after in mezzotint, and I have produced my images using mezzotint, and also I was actively involved in doing watercolors and drawing.